Hey everyone! So we need to talk about something that's been eating at Star Wars fans for years now. When Disney announced they were making new Star Wars movies back in 2012, the excitement was through the roof. We were getting Episodes VII, VIII, and IX. The saga would continue. Fast forward to today, and well, let's just say the sequel trilogy has become one of the most divisive topics in modern cinema. Love them or hate them, there's no denying these films sparked heated debates that are still raging across Reddit, Twitter, and every corner of the internet. But here's the thing. I'm not here to just bash these movies for the sake of it. Instead, I want to examine what went fundamentally wrong from a storytelling perspective. After diving through countless fan discussions, critical analyses, and rewatching the films myself, three major problems keep surfacing again and again. So, buckle up, because we're about to explore exactly why the sequel trilogy stumbled so hard, and what it teaches us about franchise filmmaking. Let's start with what might be the biggest issue of all. The sequel trilogy had no roadmap. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. But wait, didn't George Lucas make up a lot of the original trilogy as he went along? And you'd be partially right. But here's the crucial difference. When George Lucas created the original trilogy, yes, he made changes along the way, but he maintained creative control throughout the entire process. He was the singular vision guiding the ship. Even with the prequels, which get their fair share of criticism, Lucas had a clear beginning, middle and end mapped out from day one. The sequel trilogy, it's a completely different story. The sequel trilogy suffered from what critics have identified as too many competing creative visions, unlike the clear guidance that George Lucas provided for both the original and prequel trilogies. J.J. Abrams directed The Force Awakens with his own vision and mystery box approach. Then, Rian Johnson came in for The Last Jedi with a completely different philosophy about where the story should go. Finally, Abrams returned for The Rise of Skywalker, essentially trying to course-correct Johnson's choices. This isn't necessarily a bad thing in theory. Having multiple directors has worked well in other franchises, including the original Star Wars trilogy. But it didn't play to this trilogy's favor. The problem was that each director seemed to be working from a different playbook. Let's look at some concrete examples. In The Force Awakens, JJ sets up Rey as this mysterious character with unknown parentage, classic mystery box storytelling. Snoke is this enigmatic dark side user. The Knights of Ren are teased as this menacing group. Then The Last Jedi comes along, and Rian Johnson essentially says, your theories don't matter. Rey's parents were nobodies. Snoke? Dead. Moving on. Now, subverting expectations can be brilliant when done right, but it felt like Johnson was actively dismantling the foundation Abrams had laid. Finally, The Rise of Skywalker tries to have it both ways, retconning several of Johnson's choices while also trying to wrap up plot lines that were never properly developed. The sequel trilogy fails to live up to expectations due to its inconsistent story and lack of unified vision. When you compare this to something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where Kevin Feige and his team mapped out phases years in advance, the difference is stark. The sequel trilogy feels like three separate movies that happen to share some characters, rather than a cohesive story told across three installments. Each film spends precious time undoing or redirecting what came before, instead of building momentum toward a satisfying conclusion. This fundamental lack of planning creates a domino effect that impacts everything else: character development, world building, thematic coherence. It's like trying to build a house without blueprints. You might get something that looks like a house, but the foundation is shaky, and the whole structure suffers. This brings us to our second major problem: character development. Or rather, the lack thereof. The sequel trilogy introduced us to some genuinely compelling characters with incredible potential. Rey, Finn, and Poe could have been an amazing trio. Instead, we got what feels like missed opportunities across the board. Let's start with Finn, because his story might be the most frustrating of all. In The Force Awakens, Finn was the only member of the central trio who actually built relationships with both other main characters. But in the following movies, he continually built friendships outside the trio. Think about how revolutionary Finn's character concept was. A stormtrooper who breaks his conditioning and joins the Resistance? That's incredible. This could have explored themes of redemption, identity, systematic oppression, and finding your place in the world. But what happened? The trilogy struggled to find the right place for his character in the follow-up films. With The Rise of Skywalker sidelining him almost entirely, it became clear that Star Wars wasted John Boyega's talent. Instead of developing his unique perspective as someone who understood the First Order from the inside, he becomes comic relief. who spends most of his time shouting, "Rey!" Then there's Rey. Now, I want to be clear, the problem isn't that Rey is powerful. The problem is how her power is handled narratively. In the original trilogy, Luke's journey from farm boy to Jedi Knight takes 3 films and includes real failure and growth. He loses his hand, learns devastating truths about his family, and has to overcome his own fear and anger. Rey's journey feels different. She masters abilities with minimal training and rarely faces consequences for her actions. When she does struggle, it's often resolved quickly, without lasting impact. This isn't about her being a Mary Sue. It's about the story not giving her meaningful obstacles to overcome, which makes her victories feel less earned. Poe is one of the main characters of the sequels, but he deserved a better ending than the one he got in The Rise of Skywalker. Poe starts as this charismatic pilot with clear motivations, but his character arc becomes muddled as the trilogy progresses. One film, he's learning about leadership. The next, he's dealing with a retconned backstory as a spice runner. There's no clear through line. The focus on Rey and Kylo in the sequel trilogy hindered the character depth and development of other main characters, mainly Finn and Poe. The trilogy became so focused on the Rey-Kylo dynamic that it forgot to develop the friendships and relationships that should have been at its heart. Compare this to the original trilogy, where you genuinely believe in the friendship between Luke, Han, and Leia. Their relationships feel lived in and real. The sequel trio barely spends time together as a group until the final film, and by then, it's too late to build that chemistry. It's not just the main trio, either. Captain Phasma, who was heavily marketed as this intimidating new villain, gets maybe 5 minutes of actual screen time across 3 movies. The Knights of Ren are barely more than background decoration. Even legacy characters like Luke and Han feel like shadows of their former selves. The sequel trilogy introduces interesting concepts for characters, but fails to follow through on developing them in meaningful ways. It's like planting seeds, and then forgetting to water them. Our final major problem deals with world building, and this might be the most technical, but equally important issue. The sequel trilogy's world building is confusing, with issues beginning right at the opening crawl. The crawl should provide quick context, but instead, it raises more questions. Let's start with a basic setup. The First Order versus the Resistance. But wait, wasn't the Empire defeated? Isn't there a new Republic? How powerful is the First Order exactly? Why is the Resistance so small if they're fighting fascists? The films never clearly explain the political situation. We're supposed to understand that somehow, in the 30 years since Return of the Jedi, the galaxy has basically reset to Empire versus Rebels, but smaller and less clear. It's like the sequel trilogy wanted the aesthetics and conflict of the original trilogy without doing the work to justify why we're back to this situation. Then there's the issue of power scaling. In the original trilogy, the Death Star was this massive, unprecedented weapon that required stolen plans and a desperate assault to destroy. It was such a big deal that they built a second one. The sequel trilogy? We get Starkiller Base, a planet-sized Death Star that can destroy multiple star systems simultaneously. Then, in the next film, we have a fleet of Star Destroyers, each one equipped with planet-killing weapons. The scale is inflated so dramatically that it breaks the sense of stakes. The hyperspace ramming scene in The Last Jedi, while visually stunning, raises massive questions about the internal logic of the universe. If you can destroy massive fleets by jumping to hyperspace through them, why hasn't this been done before? It makes every space battle in Star Wars history seem nonsensical. Similarly, the Force abilities displayed in these films often feel inconsistent with what we've seen before. Force healing appears with no explanation. Rey and Kylo can transport physical objects across vast distances through their Force bond. These aren't necessarily bad ideas, but they needed proper setup and explanation within the world's rules. Perhaps most importantly, the sequel trilogy struggles with what to do with the legacy of the original characters and their achievements. The New Republic is barely shown before being destroyed. Luke's Jedi Academy failed. Han and Leia's relationship fell apart. The sequel trilogy seems to want to honor these characters while also clearing the board for new heroes. But in doing so, it makes the happy ending of Return of the Jedi feel hollow and temporary. Look, I want to be clear about something. There are people who genuinely love these films, and that's completely valid. Art affects everyone differently, and if the sequel trilogy worked for you, that's awesome. But from a storytelling perspective, these 3 problems, lack of cohesive planning, wasted character potential, and broken world building, represent fundamental issues that go beyond personal taste. They're craft problems that other franchise filmmakers can learn from. The sequel trilogy had everything it needed to succeed. Beloved characters, cutting-edge technology, passionate fans, and virtually unlimited resources. What it lacked was a unified vision and careful planning. The good news? Star Wars continues. We're getting new shows, new movies, new stories. And hopefully, the lessons learned from the sequel trilogy's struggles will help future creators tell better stories in that galaxy far, far away. What do you think? Did I miss any major problems, or do you disagree with my analysis? Let me know in the comments below, and may the Force be with you.